Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 1 discussion. Welcome to day 14 of Teaser season for patch 3.27. The upcoming Keepers of the Flame expansion is now just a few days away. Today, we've got a couple of very minor announcements that do kind of add up to a fair bit, and we're going to be able to talk about Grinding Gear Games' FAQ, and also the frequently asked question that they didn't answer, that unfortunately was missing from that one. Now, for those of you that missed yesterday, there were two videos yesterday. Day 13, I had to split into two because Grinding Gear Games decided to drop a tremendous amount of information on us, giving us 6 of the remaining 7 boss ascendancies. All the details are in yesterday's videos. I'll put a link to them down in the description below, but I did actually want to come back with one correction to that. And that is that I was fairly dismissive of one of the notables in Herald Lycia's Ascendancy. This is Farewell Flesh. Now, this has 2 effects. One of them is based upon rewarding you for scaling mana reservation of your heralds, and the other one rewards you for scaling life reservation of your heralds. So in yesterday's video, I talked about how you might consider building around the life reservation aspect of this, but I was more dismissive than I should have been about the mana reservation aspect. And that's because there was a unique item that I had forgotten existed. So let's talk firstly about something that's not that unique item. This is Bringer of Ruin. This is an Ascendancy notable that's found on the Elementalist. It increases the effective herald buffs on you by about 2/3, 66%, and also your mana reservation efficiency of herald skills by the same amount. Now, this is reasonably strong, especially if you want to cram a lot of heralds into a build. What if you don't want to scale a lot of heralds? What if you want a couple of really juicy ones in order to really focus on amping up their buffs? And there's a couple of synergistic combinations you could go for here. You could decide that you want to scale Herald of Ice and Herald of Thunder and get a lot of flat damage from that, or you could scale Herald of Purity to get a lot more physical damage, and Herald of Ash in order to get a lot of physical damage added as extra fire. Both of these are options. You'd either take A and B, or you take C and D. Well, Farewell to Flesh is going to reward you if you can make the mana reservation cost more. Enter the unique ring, Essence Worm. Essence Worm is the missing piece that I didn't think of yesterday. This is something that's intended as a way to get 1 free reservation on a build at a pretty high cost. It has a drawback that we can use here. +2 to level of socketed aura gems. Socketed gems have no reservation. Okay, this means you can get your determination level 22 or 23 out of Essence Worm, and it just sits there. It works for you. That's fantastic. But then you also have 80% reduced reservation efficiency of skills. Now, using this in conjunction with Bringer of Ruin is going to then put you at 14% reduced reservation efficiency. And there's a number of shenanigans you could do. You could use a second Essence Worm if you were really determined, and then that would allow you to have a second aura on your build. Or you can just simply scale through support gems. You can use Empower support, and there's other support gems that can potentially be useful and potentially add a lot to the mana cost of those gems. Do that, and you wind up in a situation where you're getting something like 80% more buff effect out of this line. Now, 80% more buff effect and 66% increased buff effect, and a number of other sources, including those found on Herald-specific cluster jewels, this can end up scaling these things into the stratosphere. Suddenly, the flat damage that I was more dismissive of on Herald of Ice and Herald of Thunder starts not just rivaling the damage that you would get from Wrath or Anger, but potentially surpassing it by quite a bit. Or alternately, you can get a multiplicative scaling instead with the Herald of Ash and Herald of Purity setup. So I thought I'd bring that to your attention. Definitely something that forgetting a one unique item that's been bad for a long time definitely ends up meaning that you miss a whole bunch of different pieces that can all fit together. Essence Worm was the key to making this work. One thing I will say about Essence Worm, a little bit of nif-nuff and trivia, people may not know about it. This 80% reduced reservation efficiency of skills. Does this scale with a mana catalyst, you might be asking? The answer is no for Essence Worms that were generated during or after Scourge League. Patch 3.16 or more recently, it does not. Very, very old Essence Worms, the answer is yes. It will scale them, and so you can get 96% if you elect to play in Standard League, but you can't get that item now. You have to find one that already exists, and that might not be particularly easy. All right, so corrections out of the way. Let's jump onto today's news, starting with patch 3.26.0k. There are patch notes that are very complicated to understand, and then there are very simple ones. This is definitely the latter category. Mercenaries League has ended, and over the next couple of hours, all of the characters in Mercenaries League were permanently moved into the parent league, so that'd be standard or permanent hardcore or whatever's appropriate for the game mode that you're playing. And a few other things that Grinding Gear Games announced earlier would happen at that time have also happened. They also mention here you can now create private leagues for the Keepers League ahead of the league's launch on October 31. But all this allows you to do is just get all of the administrative work that's involved behind the scenes in setting up a private league, get all of that out of the way now. You're not going to be able to play any earlier than anyone else, but you will be able to start inviting your friends, or if you're looking to do an open enrollment private league, you can start advertising it wherever you want. That's now an option. Next, we're going to jump over to the frequently asked questions Grinding Games posted. But I want to point out that the single most frequently asked question / argued about interpretation that I see is not covered here. And that relates to the notable schizophrenic dissociation, which is found in the Tangmazu / Simulacrum Ascendancy. Now, we're not really talking about the upside of this. The upside of this is fairly well understood. What we're talking about is the drawback. Non-cluster jewels socketed in your passive skill tree have no effect. Let me start with my interpretation of this. This means that you cannot use a Watcher's Eye usefully on your character at all. Now, here's the other interpretation, and I can understand where people that think it's this are coming from. Those people think that the only way that you can use a Watcher's Eye is if it is socketed into a passive tree extension that is added to your tree because of a cluster jewel. And then in that case, they would argue that the Watcher's Eye is not placed in your passive tree, it is placed in a cluster jewel instead, and it affects your character because of the way that cluster jewels work. Both of these make sense from a plain English language standpoint. There is no precedent that you can point to and that you can say, unquestionably, this is the way it works. So, what I would like to see is some clarification on this, but unfortunately, the FAQ does not provide that. And the reason this is so important is that this upside on this node is so unbelievably good. This is essentially the best flask in the game, aka Progenesis, active on your character all the time, and on top of that, it is Champion Fortify, active on your character all the time. The upside of this is phenomenal. Now, it's not absolutely exactly always that precise combination of effects, but that is the net effect. 40% less damage taken from hits. You take a backlash damage later that is part of that damage, but it's not all of it. And this notable has worse interactions with Chevron's Wrappings, Chaos Inoculation, and Mind Over Matter than Progenesis does. But all of that aside, this is an incredibly powerful upside, and it would be nice to get some clarification on just how significant the drawback is. Because it is definitely the case that some people read it my way, some people read it the other way, and honestly, both of them could plausibly be correct. Jumping into the things that were actually answered in the FAQ, what is happening with content that is tied to Breach? Now, most of this was already known if you paid close attention during the content reveal. Breach stones do not exist in Keepers Leagues at all, unless Grinding Games make a mistake and leave in something like the Breachstone Splinter Divination card. I think it's called the Puzzle. If that still drops, then that will probably cause a way that Breachstones exist, but they're not intended to. In Standard, they will continue to work. Breach Scarabs. These will be unavailable in the Keepers League. Existing ones will still work in Standard, and who knows, maybe in Standard they'll be able to be acquired there as well. Maven's Invitation, the Feared. Chayula has been removed, the Incarnation of Dread has been added. On top of this, they also separately announced that Uberatsuri has been removed, and that Cirrus has been added here. That was mentioned in the patch notes, it's not mentioned here. Maven's Invitation, the Hidden. This is removed, and it is replaced by Maven's Invitation, the Remembered. This is going to require witnessing the Courtyard of Wasting, Chambers of Impurity, and the Theatre of Lies. Now, this one's interesting. This is the part that's new. It That Fled does not appear in Betrayal encounters during Keepers League. Now, this is getting into tinfoil hat theory time, but maybe It That Fled is actually the pinnacle boss of Keepers of the Flame. We'll have to keep that one in mind when we're able to play the League. Will the identification of items use the Control and Click shortcut from Path of Exile 2? This is going to be Control, Alt, and Click instead. So if you talk to one of the NPCs that allows you to mass identify items, which you'll gain access to late in Act 1, then Control-Alt-Click will instantly do this without you needing to go through their dialogue options. Which uniques can be Foulborn? Not all uniques can be Foulborn. The list of uniques that can be is still ongoing. However, there will be more than 100. Uniques that come from specific sources, such as boss uniques, cannot be Foulborn. Now, I do want to point out that there are some examples of uniques that are currently boss uniques that have been demonstrated as being Foulborn, most notably the Red Nightmare. The Red Nightmare was shown in the content reveal as something that can be Foulborn, and I'm assuming that is either an explicit exception to this line, or alternately that those are no longer going to be boss uniques in patch 3.27. How rare is All going to be in Delve? The same as he has always been. Now, for those of you that are looking for all, by the time you hit depth 500, primeval cities are as common as they ever get. But in my experience, I think every time I've gone to at least 500, I've encountered at least 2 alls on the way down. It is possible to encounter less than that, but he is definitely there sometimes. The deeper you go, the more that those primeval cities will bias towards having a 1 all fight in them. You'll never get more than 1 inside a specific city. Will Faustus in the Rogue Harbour also be able to manage asynchronous trade? Okay, Grinding Games have thought of something here. The answer is no. No, it will not work. This is one of those cases where Grinding Games could have given slightly better quality of life for everyone, but if they did that, that would be weaponized against other players by price fixers and trolls. What you would see if you were able to manipulate your own Faustus shop from the axe would be that bad actors would do that. They'd go to Act 9, they'd set up a Faustus shop, and they'd put items below market price. However, they would engineer their hideout so that most people who load into it crash. This is the sort of thing that can't really happen in Path of Exile 2 because there are a lot less hideouts available, but not just a lot less hideouts, but also a lot less hideout decorations. And some of the really toxic ones that exist in Path of Exile 1 where you can really flashbang someone badly, they aren't a thing in Path of Exile 2 at all. In order to prevent this, Grinding Games need to force you to go to your hideout, minor inconvenience, but it is definitely something that needs to be done. Will we be able to change our Bloodline Ascendancy and how? Yes, you can respec your current Bloodline Ascendancy with another for free after defeating a relevant boss. Otherwise, you can use Orbs of Regret or Gold to respec those points like normal Ascendancy points for 5 refund points each. Will there be carry services for Bloodline Ascendancies? Yes, there will be carry services. Assuming that they're in the fight when the boss is killed, the additional party members will also gain access to the Bloodline Ascendancy. Will Windburst Support, which tracks the amount of movement that you do, work with movement skills? Yes, it will count movement from travel skills as well as traditional movement. Will Graft skills scale off my damage, and will damage from them be reflected to me? They don't scale off player stats, but they do have affixes which will affect their skills in many ways. Since Graft damage is not dealt by the player, reflected damage will not be dealt back to the player from Graft skill use. And how does the Spectral Tiger node, which is found in the Feral Ascendancy, work? This one is good. This one is actually really good. If you can keep minions alive, this is going to be strong for you. You can have up to 5 of them. Each of them grants 25% increased critical strike chance, 7% increased attack speed, and 7% increased cast speed. So this can be 35% attack speed and 125% critical strike chance, as well as the incidental damage that the tigers themselves do. That makes me more interested in that Feral node, not necessarily for every build, but there will definitely be builds that want to use it, especially if you find yourself in a spot where you've got 6 cohesive points on your Ascendancy, you're playing an attack-based critical strike build, and you don't really have a cohesive or clear 8th point. In that situation, it's great. Perhaps most interesting of all though, there are no changes to the patch notes today. I'm going to leave it there. I did put together a bunch of tips and tricks for people, things that you might not know, a bunch of just esoteric information from around the game. I'll put a link to that on the screen right about now. Otherwise, may your Valorbs have interesting results.